Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about violence. And when I say violence, I'm mostly referring to what Hannah Arendt wrote on the topic. She had written a book called On Violence, which I read, and I want to share my thoughts about it with you. So, On Violence is quite short book about what can be summarized in a short sentence, which the author writes in the book, and the sentence is power is opposite to violence. When violence kicks in, then you know for sure that the power is out. So this is great so far. I will give you a couple of more quotes that I found interesting from the book, and then I can share my thoughts about this, because I think Hannah Arendt's comments are weird in a way. So first quotation is what Sorel remarked 60 years ago: the problems of violence still remain very obscure, is as true today as it was then. I mentioned the general reluctance to deal with violence as a phenomenon in its own right, and I must qualify this statement. If we turn to discussions of phenomenon of power, we soon find that there exists a consensus among political theorists from left to right to the effect that violence is nothing more than the most flagrant manifestation of power. Quote unquote, all politics is a struggle for power, the ultimate kind of power is violence. End of quote, said C. Wright Mills, echoing as it were Max Weber's definition of the state as the rule of man over man based on the means of legitimate, that is, allegedly legitimate, violence. End of quotation. So the next quotation, I start finally to come back to Sorel's and Pareto's earlier denunciation of the system as such. The greater the bureaucratization of public life, the greater will be the attraction of violence. In a fully developed bureaucracy, there is nobody left with whom one can argue, to whom one can present grievances, on whom the pressures of power can be exerted. Bureaucracy is the form of government in which everybody is deprived of political freedom, of the power to act. For the rule by nobody is not no rule. And where all are equally powerless, we have a tyranny without a tyrant. The crucial feature in the student rebellions around the world is that they are directed everywhere against the ruling bureaucracy. This explains what at first glance seems so disturbing, that the rebellions in the East demand precisely those freedoms of speech and thought that the young rebels in the West say they despise as irrelevant. On the level of ideologies, the whole thing is confusing. It is much less so if we start from the obvious fact that the huge party machines have succeeded everywhere in overruling the voice of the citizens. Even in countries where freedom of speech and association is still intact. The dissenters and resistors in the East demand free speech and thought as the preliminary conditions of political action. The rebels in the West live under conditions where these preliminaries no longer open the channels for action for the meaningful exercise of freedom. And the last quotation, I start, whatever the administrative advantages and disadvantages of centralization may be, its political result is always the same. Monopolization of power causes the drying up of all authentic power sources in the country. In the United States, based on a great plurality of powers and their mutual checks and balances, we are confronted not merely with the disintegration of power structures, but with power seemingly still intact and free to manifest itself, losing its grip and becoming ineffective. I'll stop here and I'll start by interpreting the last part. So, with the last quotation, I do not really understand where Hannah Arendt stands on the topic of power. I understand she's anti-violence, but I see something very disturbing there. She's pro-power. So is Hannah Arendt a Democrat or what is she? Because as I really don't understand. So she mentions everywhere that power and violence are two opposite things. And for me, it seems clearly violence is bad. But because they are opposite, it means the power is good. So this sounds weird, to be honest, coming from someone like her who wrote about the totalitarian aspects of the Nazi regime and the Eichmann trial and so on and the banality of evil. So I don't understand, honestly, if Hannah Arendt is pro-totalitarian power or just pro any power or anti-power. So, okay, maybe she wants to stay above this dichotomy, but anyway, it's weird to hear that she is complaining that here in the United States they are confronted with the disintegration of power and the power loses its grip and is ineffective. Okay, and do you want it the opposite? Or yeah, so that's weird. So in my opinion, yes, she's right, and I agree with the statement that power is opposite to violence, but I do not agree that power is something positive. We should think about it, but honestly, we could live without power. Other thing, from the second quotation, great, so spot on. Bureaucratization means rule of nobody. You don't have to whom to present your grievances. This is absolutely fantastic analysis. Yes, we live in a monster system, and the suffering of life comes from the fact that we have a centralized bureaucratic nation state. This is absolutely unbelievable for me that I was taught in school that there was this great illuministic enlightened revolution in the 1848 and we had these national heroes. Well, hell no, I don't want any national state and national heroes. All those bullshits are just bullshits. We don't need states, nation states to have this monster system, repressive system. No, thank you. So yeah, spot on. Bureaucracy, tyranny without the tyrant. So the problem with the bureaucracy is that you have all these armies, police, a legal system, political parties, and the elites of these capture the state. They have monopoly on violence, and you cannot do anything to resist and to escape this repressive system of monstrous proportions. How did we people end up accepting this as something positive? This is obviously the worst idea ever. This nation states, it's the worse, I guess, worse than any other form of societal organization that we experience. So it's an idiotic idea to discriminate based on nationality and religion of the ethnicity. Yeah, like, you don't speak the same language, we eliminate you from our group. This is the worst idea humankind could ever invent. The French and the Germans who invented this, totally idiotic. Let's escape this. So back to Hannah Arendt, the violence. So there is something interesting in the second quote that I put here. This is about the different desires of the rebellious youth in East and West. So in the East, they want freedom of speech. In the West, they already have it and say it's bullshit. And this is something very interesting. So it seems freedom of speech is not something that you should desire, because it doesn't bring happiness per se, but you need to want the destruction of the bureaucracy, especially the national centralized state. And that's in a nutshell about Hannah Arendt and violence. And I will end with something. She also wrote that every reduction in power is an open invitation to violence. And because those who hold the power feel slipping it from their hands, either the government or the governed, have always found it difficult to resist the temptation to substitute violence for it. So indeed, and I agree here, that she also thinks the governed also can have power. So this is actually the last sentence in the book. So I guess she received some critiques by her editors, and she finally understood the governed also need to be part of the discussion of power. The governed also can be violent, that's true, but we are the sovereign, right? So we should be the ones who decide, and if the bureaucracy doesn't want to implement our desires, then definitely we need to act. So it's one of the biggest topics, this violence and power. I'm glad I could bring something to the debate. If you liked this video about this great topic, please subscribe, comment, and see you in my next video. Goodbye.